Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Civitas On Air podcast, where we bring to you informed debate and discussion.
Good morning. This is Civitas On Air podcast from Collegium Civitas. Today we will be talking about Passion Project, which is Partnership for Sustainable Development and Social Innovation, financed by Polish National Agency for Academic Exchange. My name is Mirella Panek-Owsiańska, and my today guest is Tryggvi Thayer from University of Iceland. Hello, Tryggvi.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to have you. Thank you for accepting our invitation. We want to talk about education for sustainable development today. So I know it's your topic, and you teach about it, you write about it, and you were also a member of the project Passion. Am I right?
Well, yes, in part. That I sort of come into sustainable development education and sustainable education from futures studies. So futures studies would be my main project, but because of the close relationship with sustainable education, that's how I sort of come into that area.
Okay, so let me first ask you, how do you think the education about sustainable development is in Iceland? Do you have it as academic courses, or do you teach about it? Is it popular among students? What's your impression?
Well, yes, it's certainly a field that has been that we've seen a lot of increased interest in, both from faculty members and students. That and in large part that's due to just the increasing focus on sustainable development throughout Europe. It's not just an Icelandic thing, but of course in Iceland we see it in certain contexts relating to energy use and especially the use of our sort of natural resources in terms of our open spaces, which we have a lot of in Iceland, and the impact of tourism on those spaces. That's really been an impetus for increased awareness about sustainability here in Iceland. So we do certainly have topics and courses that students can take within the University of Iceland. And we are sort of developing specific programs that are more focused on sustainability as well. But up until now, I would say it's been regarded more as a transversal subject that we seek to integrate into a number of courses. And that's been happening for quite some time now, but now we're starting to see some of our faculty members proposing specific programs that focus on sustainability education and sustainable development quite specifically.
Okay, because when I talked to other members of Passion Project and their countries, they were not so sure whether students are interested in that topics. So I would say you are lucky that your
well,
students.
I think, and as I say, it relates in part to just very significant changes we've seen within Iceland in a fairly brief period of time that has really raised awareness of sustainability issues.
Yeah, and part of your research is a comparison between the skills which are required for if we are talking about sustainable development, and if we are talking about future work, future world. So are those the same skills, or do you see any other skills we need to, let's say, to survive next 50 years?
Yeah, so I have compared competence frameworks that have been proposed and used for both sustainable education or sustainability education, and on the other hand, future studies. And I started looking at this because people in future studies have been advocating for sort of an extended sort of sense of time within higher education for many years, that these futurists have been very aware that we need to start educating people to think about what they want the world to look like in 30, 40, 50 years, or maybe even longer, depending on certain fields. And it struck me when I started sort of discussing this with people in sustainability education that their sense was that they were doing what the futurists advocate, but under the title of sustainability education. And when I started looking at these, I found that they were actually more different than people seem to see it themselves, because, and in particular, the differences that I found were that sustainability education is very oriented towards strategic thinking, right? So it's very much about the planning of what people hope to see over the next few decades, whereas future studies are primarily concerned with developing visions of what things could look like within the next few decades. So I found that the two fields are actually quite complementary. That on the one hand, you have the futurists who try to develop these very rich descriptions of what futures could be, for good or ill. So either bad futures or good futures. And then you have the sustainability component that sort of backtracks from those visions and considers, well, what do we have to do to make the most beneficial visions, future visions, actually occur? And so,
but would you say maybe sustainability people have enough knowledge or research that they know that, for example, this future will look bad, so and it's the only possible scenario, and they are trying to teach about it, and they don't see any other areas where it can be very different?
Well, within the competence frameworks that I've looked at, that certainly there is this notion of what we would call in future studies the preferred future. That is the future that we consider most beneficial. But what I found lacking within the sustainable education competency frameworks was the skills that directly relate to how you construct a plausible picture of a possible future. And that within the future studies, it's a very complex process of both, using available data in the present, analyzing that data, and then extending it in creative ways towards the future. So using that sort of as material to think about how things can be. And it's that creative component that I found just wasn't really articulated very well within the sustainable education frameworks. Is that sense of how you imagine a future, or the future that you want, and describe it in a plausible manner where you actually sort of make the connections between technological, social, environmental developments today and what is feasible, say, in 50 years.
Okay, and you wrote also about the role of technology. What would you say about the connection about technology and sustainability? I mean, should we have more fear or more hope if we connect those two areas?
Yeah, well, I tend to focus a lot on technology, both just my interest in technological development, but also because it is one of the most significant drivers of change in our current environment. And that many of the solutions that we'll be looking toward to address sustainability challenges today and in the future will involve technology. And so I think that technology, it sort of always has to be a significant part of the equation and what sort of solutions we're looking to devise. And in that sense, that technology and technological development, in the end, it always has to be a positive force. That because it's not going away,
and it so has to be, but it's not.
Well, we tend to be nervous about technological development, and especially in recent years where technological development has just been becoming increasingly rapid, and it's harder for us to sort of stay on top of what is happening in technology. And we hear about significant changes that seem to occur to us all of a sudden, but that's usually not the case, that these are developments that have a longer history, and they've gone through an evolutionary period where they have sort of adapted or been adapted towards our contexts in the present. And so usually the technologies that emerge as most useful for us are the ones that are going to work for our benefit in the present. But that is always dependent on what factors we're considering most important. And this is really where the sustainability element comes in, because of the increasing awareness of our need to integrate the concept of sustainability into all of our developments, that's becoming an important part of the technological developmental cycle. And so the technologies that are being developed, that they are often being developed today as ways to address sustainability. So for example, if we were just to take something very simple like our smartphones, that each generational cycle of smartphones that we've had over the past 10 to 15 years, which is the brief lifetime of smartphones, has become increasingly efficient in terms of how it uses energy and that sort of thing. This is not something we're necessarily aware of all the time. That, for example, if I bought a new phone a month ago, that the way it uses its batteries, etc., is much more efficient than a phone that I would have bought 5 years ago. So this is built into technological development, and that will increasingly be the case. And so we are using technological development as a means of addressing sustainability challenges. And that's sort of my main point, that technology is a part of the equation of addressing sustainability challenges, and it will be increasingly in the future.
And do you know any good examples of technology which was influenced purely by sustainability, and we can use it today?
An obvious one today would be electric cars. That this is something that is almost entirely driven by a sustainability mindset. That it is our way to get away from using fossil fuels without disrupting sort of our economic and social systems too much. Even though there's still debates about electric cars, but I think that everyone has pretty much accepted that they are the future, that within the next few decades, we will increasingly phase out not just cars. If we're looking far enough into the future, that we're phasing out fossil fuel driven travel technologies, those technologies that we use to get from one place to another. So we have already on the table proposals of how we can do this with aircraft, how we can do this with trains, how we can do this with ships. And so that's a very obvious example of how technology is driving sort of the sustainable development in a very specific field that affects pretty much all of us.
It's interesting because I've read an article about electric cars in Poland, where, as you may know, our energy system is still very fossil fuels based. And in that article, the author said that even if we have electric car, we charge it with the energy which is coming from fossil fuels in Poland, particularly. So it's not such a big difference when we use it. So it's another specific of the country. Let's say that the electric cars not everywhere might be such a sustainable means of transportation.
Yeah, well, I mean, we certainly do hear those debates, but I think that those are challenges that we remain to be addressed. And certainly there are also debates, for example, about lithium batteries. That
yes,
lithium is not necessarily a very clean and efficient way of powering batteries. So there's a lot of research going on about how we can construct batteries using other more sustainable materials. But there's also a lot of research going on how we can generate energy in ways that don't use fossil fuels. And certainly, I mean, I'm talking from Iceland, where we have a lot of clean,
you are the lucky ones.
Sustainable energy.
Yes.
Yeah, and so we're certainly in something of a privileged position in that regard. But we can also look at countries, for example, like Denmark, like Norway. Norway is an oil-producing country, but they're putting a lot of funding and research effort into developing energy sources for themselves that don't use those fossil fuels. And Denmark, their windmills and all of that sort of thing. So there are various ways of addressing the challenges, and I think that we'll see just ongoing development in that regard, how we go about producing the energy that we need, and those are challenges that will be addressed.
Yeah, and it really seems that those systems thinking competence is very important, because certain issues regarding energy or sustainability are very complex. So if we want our students to understand and to have the whole picture of it, this competence will be very crucial. But what other competences regarding sustainability you define as crucial for teaching and in sustainability education?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the systems thinking competence, that really is key to the whole thing for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. And I would say that both in sustainability sciences and future studies, that systems thinking is the underlying foundation of everything that we pile on top of that, because it is really about seeing those connections and making the connections, for example, between electric cars and lithium and different energy resources and that sort of thing. But I think also that one of the key competences, not everyone will agree with me that this can be framed as a competence, that is creativity and creative thinking. And there is a tendency to sort of say, well, creative thinking and creativity, that's not something we can teach. And I think that the reason that we suggest that is not because of anything having to do with creativity itself, but it is that we define creativity as a rather fuzzy subject and one that is very bound within certain contexts. So something that is creative within one context is not creative within another. But in terms of competency and how we address the need for creativity in education, that we can teach people about creative thinking and what they can do to sort of promote and foster their own and others' creative thinking. And that's at least what I have done in my teaching, is to teach people about tools and methods they can use to promote what we call divergent and convergent thinking, which is a method of generating creative ideas, and then teaching them how to evaluate the ideas that are available to them for creativity. What is the most creative idea and that sort of thing. So I would say certainly creativity is a key concept, but the other one is foresight.
Foresight,
I think that we can define that as a competence as well. That is how, and as a competence, really what it involves is how we make use of the data, knowledge, and information that we have today to project what could happen in the future, what is feasible in the future, and what is plausible as a suggested future.
Which also it's a question how to promote the research which is already done by many scientists around the world regarding sustainability, and probably all of us seen the movie Don't Look Up on Netflix, where it was very clearly shown that it's not popular. I mean, if you cannot talk about your research in like 30 seconds, or if you don't have any sexy title of your report, not many people will use it. So do you have any suggestions? What do you think scientists could do better so their research can reach governments or think tanks or activists, or be used in such a conference like COP27, which was recently held in Egypt?
Yeah, well, I think so. You know, you mentioned the movie Don't Look Up, which is a really very interesting story from just based on what you were saying. But I think the other thing is regarding research, and especially a lot of the research that we have today that generates uncertainty. And that's really one of the issues, that the increasing amount of information that is generated through research and development, that it creates a lot of uncertainty, and people find uncertainty very uncomfortable. And some people can find it sort of more comforting to just turn your head, pretend it doesn't exist, or don't look up, as the movie says, and pretend like it's not happening. And that's really just a way of dealing with uncertainty. But I think that what we're trying to do ultimately in teaching more about sustainability and about futures, and the increasing interest in sustainability and futures, that really is about educating people about how we deal with uncertainty. And that uncertainty, it can be sort of uncomfortable, certainly, and it will always be uncomfortable.
But we can live with it.
But we try to see the opportunities within the uncertainty rather than just the negative effects. And that's really, I think, sort of sums up what ultimately sustainability education is about, is teaching people to see opportunities in the types of things that we see happening around us today, whether those raise or sort of present themselves as uncomfortable or whatever. But I think ultimately we have to try to be positive and think about what we can do to create the most beneficial futures for us and our future generations.
Another part of passion projects were social innovations. And what would you say is missing in academic teaching if we are talking about social innovations? I mean, is it possible to teach it in purely academic way, or many people say that you should go to the field, you should create or found your own organization, for example, and it will be more beneficiary if you start to be a social innovator in action than to be a student of the social innovation course. Would you agree, or is there also a place for some academic teaching in social innovations?
Well, certainly. I mean, and we're in higher education. The theory always matters to us. And so there's always going to be that academic element. But I would agree that something like social innovation, that it's best taught as a practical approach to addressing challenges than purely theoretical. And one of the reasons I say that is that because one of the key elements in social innovation as a process is empathy. And really we tend to say that before you can truly become a social innovator, then you have to be able to put yourselves in the position of the people that you're innovating for and view the challenges from their perspective. And that, I think, is just it's a critical element in this, and you can only do that in practical ways. But that also becomes a key motivator, because you can use then those teaching moments to encourage your learners to look around themselves and to examine their immediate surroundings and look for challenges within their social contexts that they can address with social innovations, because in those social contexts, which are their own, they have a unique perspective. They can view challenges, from the position of those mostly affected by them, right?
Yeah. And do you remember or do you know any interesting social innovation from Iceland? The one you like or you admire or
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm mostly interested in small innovation or sort of baby step innovations, I call them, and this is the thing about many social innovations, because they are so tied to this notion of empathy and understanding the perspective of those who you are innovating for. And so some of the most notable social innovations that we've seen in Iceland have been parts of international trends, and those are certainly the innovations such as the Me Too wave and how people are addressing that, the Free the Nipple movement that emerged several years ago and here in Iceland was launched by upper secondary students. So it's those kinds of innovations that I always find most interesting, because those are people you can just really tie the innovators to the challenge, and these are people who are really trying to solve or address challenges within their own immediate environment. But other sort of interesting challenge or interesting social innovations that I've come across, for example, was in one upper secondary school here in Iceland, a group of students launched a Facebook group for all of the students in the in this upper secondary school to address challenges relating to food waste. And it was just such a simple solution that they just created this Facebook group where people could post that they had a leftover half sandwich if anyone forgot to bring their own lunch or something like that. So they had set up this environment where they could share food rather than throwing it away. And, you know, that's a social innovation where they are addressing really a very significant challenge that extends way beyond their specific context, but they're doing it on their own terms and within their own environment.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Recently, a friend of mine became an Ashoka Fellow, a member of International Social Innovators chain, or because she invented also using Facebook group a way to rescue the things you don't need from trash. Because it started when she saw very nice, well-designed Polish chair, which was standing somewhere close to the trash and was waiting for to be thrown away. I mean, it was thrown away by someone, and she made a picture and she posted on Facebook saying that maybe someone would like to rescue because it's really good design from old Polish school and so on and so on. And some people said, okay, give me the address and I will take it. And it started the whole movement. Right now, the Facebook group that are like 100,000 people who are sending pictures of some things they found on the trash, and some other people are saying, okay, so I will rescue it, I will take it, I will use it, and it's also very creative way of dealing with the things we don't need, and the circular economy, of course. So we also have similar
we've had
innovation.
a number of those here in Iceland as well. But another that I was going to mention is that that we have had projects recently where we've been encouraging teachers in Iceland to use social media for their professional development, to share ideas and lesson plans and that sort of thing. And we've seen some teachers launch projects which really can only be described as social innovations, where they're creating some sort of dynamic that encourages teachers to share their experiences. There's, for example, one teacher who has, for the past 3 years, organized on Twitter sort of a game leading up to Christmas, which she calls the 12 days of Twitter. And basically, she makes a calendar with certain themes for each day, and then teachers are encouraged to share examples out of their teaching that relate to the topic of that day on Twitter and other social media. And it's really fun to watch, because you start to see really what teachers are doing within their classrooms to address their students' needs, and it becomes very open and a great social innovation.
Great. Okay, Tryggvi, thank you very much. I guess we've discussed many topics, from competence for the future, sustainability, education, social innovation. And if someone wants to have more information about the Passion Project, the whole research and the effects of this, the results of this project are online. So I encourage you to read something more about this project. And do you have one last dream about the way the sustainability education could develop, for example, in Iceland or in Europe or around the world?
Iceland, Europe, the world in general, that I think that really what I would say that is something that I've hoped to see for a long time, which I think that we're actually starting to see under sort of these umbrellas of sustainable development and futures, is that we are extending that time period that we sort of use to frame education, that we are more understanding that the students that we are teaching today in higher education, that these are the people who are going to shape the future of the world 30, 40 years from now. And what we need to address in the way we educate them has to relate somehow to those futures. And I think that there's an increasing understanding of this, and it's a significant change in higher education.
And I would say rather optimistic, which is a good end of our discussion. Thank you very much.
I think you cannot be anything but an optimistic futurist in the end.
Thank you very much. Tryggvi Thayer from University of Iceland was my guest today, and this was Civitas on Air podcast from Collegium Civitas. Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Civitas on Air. We cover current and important political and social topics. Our work is produced by researchers and students from Collegium Civitas, together with Radio Palace. Please subscribe to our podcast by visiting your favourite streaming service, like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And do stay tuned for the next episode.